Okay, back to the belt grinder bucket Damascus. And this time the grinding dust is a little darker, a little more of a red tint to it. I've been using ceramic belts that are red. I don't know if that'll affect it. I don't know much about this at all, so we're going to experiment some more. See if we can step this up. Doesn't that look yummy? A lot of debris in it. A lot of stuff to clean up. Yuck. Alright, well, let's get to it. But first, some lunch. My favorite. Chicken sandwich. Okay, so we're going to spread this stuff out on a piece of canvas and try to get some of the water out of it by wrapping it up and squeezing it and drain off as much as we can before we dry it out in the forge. Okay, there's our little, I don't know, crucible, I guess, whatever you want to call it. Our drying canister, how's that? And into the forge with it. And it didn't take too much to dry it out. There's a lot of like belt particles in there, like canvas pieces, that sort of stuff. So I left it in a little bit longer, got a little hotter. See if I could break that stuff down. Make sure everything was burned out of it. Okay, before it cools down too far, we went for round number 2. I'm going to get as much of this stuff as I possibly can because my canister is much bigger than it was last time. And we've got some space to fill. So round number 2, and for some reason this stuck in the bottom of the heater. But I eventually got it all out. There was a lot of debris in there. There was some welding rods that I'd thrown in there that were burned down to the end. I'm sure there was a little flux on those. So there's a variety of things coming out of this bucket. So you need to try to separate just the steel. And it took a little bit, and I tried a couple of different things, but it came down to wrap a magnet in paper, and I tried sprinkling it down the side, letting the debris fall and the magnetic particles stick to the side. That was tedious. So back to the old method of back and forth over the top. Let it jump up on the magnet. And I kept going and going and going, and this took about just about an hour to go through this several times and come up with a clean pile that I could actually use. So once that was clean, I found myself about a 9-inch long piece of 1-inch square ID tubing, 1/8 inch thick wall. It's a lot bigger than the last time, heftier, thicker. And I cut a couple of 1/4 inch plugs to weld in the end, nice and tight. Now the last time I did this, I posted it and said I was going to try the whiteout trick that Jay Nielsen talks about. And I got some comments People said you shouldn't do that, ventilation, it's dangerous, bad for you. I did a little research, got a bunch of fans working downwind from it, and I think it'll be safe. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot, and I think it'll work out okay. If I'm dead by the end of this video, you'll know why. So if you look at the back of this stuff, it says keep away from flames, flammable, harmful. So I started, that's not going to work. So we dumped it in, coated the entire inside, just like we're supposed to, and let that dry. Now a friend of mine gave me this box full of ball bearings. So I figure I'm going to mix the powder and the ball bearings and see if I can come up with a pattern of Damascus. Now someone else commented last time that perhaps there wasn't enough carbon left in the powder. So I measure out enough ball bearings to fill the thing, and I won't use them all. A lot of the space will be taken up by the powder. And that didn't work. Just do it by hand. So we went powder, ball bearings, powder, ball bearings. You get the idea. Until we were full. And tap it all down, fill in all the voids. Make sure there's no air pockets in there. And just kept going until it was full. So hopefully the ball bearings will bring some carbon to the party. If the iron particles are void of that, and we'll see what happens. We weld the plug in the other end, and we left a little pinhole for those gases to escape. Apparently that's a thing. We did it last time, and we're doing it this time. So we've got a bigger canister. We're not using stainless steel, we're using ball bearings and our grinder bucket dust. And here's our first weld. You can see that flame coming out of the end of that, where it's gassing off. And my second heat here, I got the center of the canister a little bit hot. It's right under a burner, and it started to burn that canister. But everything was holding together, so I decided to keep going with it. So I decided to do one more weld after the first two. And I think I went a little too far with it, because at this point I realized it felt a little different under the hammer, and I suspected that I was welding the canister to the billet inside. But I don't know anything about this, or much about this at all. Very little experience with this. So I wasn't sure. So I just left it to cool. And you can see this sort of void area. That's where it got a little overheated, sort of bulging there in the middle, but it's got that very hot looking crusty area down the center. So I went about trying to cut this canister off, and as I suspected, there were spots that were welded to it. And it took me a good hour to get this canister off here. A lot of it was barely stuck, and some of it was just downright welded. And I ended up grinding through it to get down to the material. But it was quite a process to try to get it off there. And I think my mistake was that I'm not familiar with how hot to get the thing. So my tendency is to overheat it to make sure that everything's welded together inside. And I think that I went too far with that. It looked promising in the beginning. Things started peeling off pretty well. But then it just turned ugly. I figured if I sliced down both sides, perhaps I could peel it off either side. And that didn't work out quite so well. As I was chiseling this off, the section towards the handle that was the coldest in the forge broke off. And you could still see the ball bearings that were sort of half welded in there. So the parts that wouldn't come off, I simply ground through them. And right about there, about a third of it broke and had some voids inside. And that's the original piece that broke off. So I decided to clean up the surfaces of these two that broke and weld them together in the forge. Forge this thing out and see what it looked like. Clean it up and give myself a couple of nice, shiny, clean welding surfaces. Try to increase my chances of success here. Give it a little rebar handle. At this point, I'm just hoping for, some kind of success, not really knowing what's going to happen next. But the individual bars, though they broke in half, seemed pretty good as I was grinding in them to clean them up. There were a few inclusions, but not a ton. So we forge welded it 3 times. I believe it was on the 3rd weld. You can see the sparks there. I got it a little bit hot in the center. That same burner. And I think it started to burn the steel there a little bit. So I turned it into something that resembled a bar, so that I could grind the surfaces off and get ready to etch this thing. And as I was flattening it out on the anvil, I noticed a crack about a third the way down. You'll see it here in a second. there. So I removed the end where the tongs are, shortened up that piece so I could just do a etching to test it. I flatten it out a little bit on the power hammer just to sort of plenish it out, spread it out, to get a better idea of what the pattern looks like if there is one. And I started with a 40 grit belt just to clean up the surfaces, get rid of the pits, and there were a few cracks in the surface. I wanted to see how deep they went, and most of them were superficial. So I think this thing could turn into something. I might be able to use this for something. Cleaned up pretty nicely. Then I went to a 120 grit belt. Try to refine that surface a little bit and see what kind of etch we can get. I took it down to I believe it's a 400 grit, just to polish it up a little bit. Like I said, I'm trying to give myself every advantage here to get some kind of a pattern or be able to see something, or just get a better result than I did last time. So, into the vice grips and into the etching. And let that sit for just a couple of minutes. Pull it out and see what I've got initially. And I was sort of pleasantly surprised. It actually has some sort of a pattern. It's very random. So I put it back in and left it about 10 minutes, I think, 15 minutes in my neutralizer. And these are the pieces that broke off. You can see the one has ball bearings still showing that have not been fully welded. And there she is. I decided that I wanted a little darker pattern than that. See where it went from there. So I was going to drop it back in and just let it sit for a good half an hour. And this is what I came out with. I'm not sure how hardenable this is going to be, but I think it's interesting enough. I'm going to split another railroad spike and make another Damascus railroad spike knife out of it. I think the more that it's forged, the more interesting that pattern will become. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Thanks to all of you who have subscribed. I do appreciate that. And have fun, guys. And most of all, be safe. Take care. See you next time.